There are a lot of questions archaeologists have to try to answer when they come across an ancient artifact or site. How old is it? Who made it? Why do they make it? What was it used for? There are times when they can answer these questions quite easily, but there are also times when the answers are much harder to find. All the discoveries you are about to see in this video belong to the latter category. Hippocaust. Our first discovery is one that archaeologists know the function of, but we can't imagine how the Romans were able to come up with something so many centuries ahead of its time. It's a structural feature called hippocaust, and you can think of it as the world's first central heating system. As hard as this might be to believe, the Romans had underfloor heating in their homes 2,000 years ago. That's a luxury that most people in the world don't have today. Examples of hippocaust systems have been found all over former Roman territories, but the best preserved examples are in Bath, England. No matter where hippocausts are found, their design is always similar. It's a 2-foot gap beneath the floor supported by pillars into which warm air would rush from a furnace in the corner of the room. Later hippocausts also included gaps between the walls, so heat could flow throughout the house as long as the furnace remained lit. A Roman home could be kept from even in the coldest months after winter. Somehow the idea fell out of favor after the collapse of the Roman Empire. Jade Kong. We know that some of the ancient inhabitants of China loved making artifacts known as jade kongs. What we don't know is why countless examples of beautifully elaborate, decorated jade kongs have been found in the Zhejiang province of China, which suggests that they were created by the Langzhou culture, which lived there during the Neolithic era. Each kong is a square tube with a circular hole through the middle. Although describing them in such basic terms doesn't do justice to the artifacts, decorations on the object differ from kong to kong, but a significant portion of them have human faces painted in the corners around the hole in the middle. It is speculated that the face represents spirits. The basis for that idea is that with very few exceptions, jade kongs are only ever found in tombs. They probably have a spiritual significance of some kind, but we can't even guess at what that significance may have been. We also can't guess why the kongs seem to have gone out of fashion almost overnight. They were ubiquitous until around 2,000 years ago, after which it doesn't seem that any more were ever made. Astrolabe. Some historians describe the astrolabe as the ancient world equivalent to the computer. We're not sure whether that's 100% accurate as a description, but they certainly make for fascinating artifacts when they are discovered. Mystery surrounds the invention of the astrolabe. We know David was popular in the 13th century, but there's some evidence that the first astrolabes were made much longer ago than that. It might have even been invented by the Theon of Alexandria II 400 years ago, and then revisited and revised by the Muslim inventors after 10th century before catching on as an idea 300 years later. Muslims found them particularly useful because they could be used to identify the position of the Qibla no matter where they were in the world, but they can also be used for 40 varieties of other purposes. You can use an astrolabe to predict the transit of celestial objects in the night sky, thus keeping track of the changing seasons and, in later examples, the time of day. The most sophisticated example of astrolabes even have charts engraved onto their surfaces that allow their owners to adjust the setting to account for time differences when traveling long distances. Foguera. We started this video by talking about ancient Roman hippocausts, but now we are going to look at even more incredible examples of ancient engineering. If you were to visit the region of Adrar and Algeria, you will find an incredible irrigation system that is known by two names. Many people call it a canute, but it's more accurate to call it a foguera. Through systems like this, the ancient occupants of the region could take water from distant hills and direct it to their towns and settlements. The principle is simple yet brilliant to make a foguera. Engineers would find hills and mountains with a source of fresh water near the top, and then dig tunnels beneath the site of the hills and mountains to allow the water to travel down and then gather in artificial pools. The way it works is similar to the way an aqueduct works, only below the ground rather than above it. The first foguera in the world is thought to have been built in Persia a little over 2,000 years ago, but that's far less impressive than the one in Algeria. In terms of size and sophistication, the color blue was very important to the ancient Maya. They used it to decorate many of their ancient monuments and sculptures, and they found a way of creating a form of blue pigment that keeps its brightness and vibrancy no matter how many years go by. The unusual properties of the Maya blue pigment were first noticed by scientists in 1931, but experts have never been totally sure how this ancient culture went about the process of creating it. Investigations in the 1960s confirmed that the persistence of the color was down to a unique chemical bond between indigo and a clay mineral called palygorskite, but the scientists after time could not work out how the bond was made. In 2021, a new study of Maya blue on the artifacts found at Chichen Itza solved the long-standing mystery. It seems that indigo leaves and palygorskite clever heated up by burning copal incense. What substance akin from tree resin that acts as a natural glue? The combination of ingredients has to be measured precisely, and the heat has to be restricted to a specific temperature to avoid destroying the color. Creating Maya blue is hard even if you know how to do it. How they came up with it in the first place is an even bigger mystery. Iranian underground city. Creating a city underground isn't something that most civilizations would consider today because of the extreme difficulty of cutting into the rock and creating sophisticated structures underground. Those difficulties did not put off our ancient ancestors. There are several notable examples of underground cities all over the world. As an example, here is Nushabad underground city in Iran. This three-story city was created 1,500 years ago and once sheltered the Persians as they sought refuge during times of war. Nobody in the modern age even knew the city was there until a surprised resident of the modern city above the underground one found an entrance to it while digging out a seaweed ditch on his land. Just over a decade ago, archaeologists were called to the scene and eventually excavated a network of air ducts, canals, tunnels, chambers, and even a few booby traps. It's thought that the city is the work of the Sasanian Empire, which existed here between the years 224 and 651. The empire was at constant risk of attack throughout its existence and probably built the city as a hiding place for women, children, and the elderly. Inca soil. The Inca were not the first advanced civilization to live in Peru, but they did build some of the country's most amazing ancient monuments. One of those monuments is more in Urubamba. It might not look as visually impressive as a large temple or citadel, but this cluster of circular depressions on the ground is far more sophisticated than any temple dug into the ground at each layer. You will find a different type of soil. None of the soil is native to the area. The Inca brought soil here from other territories and planted it at different depths within the circle to find out which types of crop would or would not grow. The temperature at the top of the spiral system is very different to the temperature at the bottom, with each level roughly the right temperature for the environment that the soil came from. Inca farmers could experiment with their crops here and then, after figuring out what worked, send word to farmers in other territories and tell them what they should plant for their harvests. It's an ingenious system, and it was invented more than 500 years ago. Hydraulic system. We travel to Iran and head back underground to check out our next ancient wonder. This is the amazing hydraulic system beneath the city of Kish. There is an ultra-modern city right on top of these ancient structures. It offers 5-star restaurants and hotels, and many of the tourists who travel here to use these facilities have no idea that there is something so wonderful beneath their feet. This is one of the largest surviving examples of Mesopotamian version of the quinat-like Fagara system we looked at earlier. This is basically a network of vertical wells built on a long, gentle slope, getting water from the distant mountains to the valleys. This incredible feat of hydraulic engineering was completed about 2,500 years ago. There's a common misconception that the Kariza Kish is actually a farmer underground city, but that is the case. People look at these long passages and see streets, but they are just water channels. Similarly, the chambers that look like houses are merely access points. The lights and benches that you can see in the video aren't original features. They were added recently by local authorities to make the old Qinat more attractive to visitors. Nimrud lens. Some archaeologists and historians claim that the Nimrud lens is the world's first telescope. I don't see that it was never designed for such a function, and that its magnification properties were used to magnify the sun rays and start fires rather than gaze at distant objects or stars. Who is right and who is wrong, where the debate has been ongoing for well over a century and doesn't seem likely to end anytime soon. The artifact, which is also known as the layered lens, was discovered in the ruins of Assyrian Palace in Iraq in 1850. It started life as a humble chunk of rock crystal, but was cut, shaped, and polished into its current shape. The Nimrud lens is capable of magnifying an object by a factor of 3, which might not sound like a lot, but that's the same magnification factor as the telescope that was invented in the Netherlands in 1608. The Nimrud lens was already about 2,600 years old when the Dutch telescope was invented. So it's no exaggeration to say that if the lens really was invented to be a telescope, it was thousands of years ahead of its time. South-pointing chariot. The ancient occupants of China not only invented the concept of a compass, but also reinvented the compass many times over. They came up with a version of a compass that looks like a fish, another compass that looks like a spoon, and then this odd device that's known as the south-pointing chariot because the outstretched arm of the figure atop it always points due south. South-pointing chariots were considered an essential piece of kit for travelers in China for a very long time. Evidence suggests that they were invented during the 3rd century and remained in regular use until the 13th century. Unlike most compasses, the south-pointing chariot doesn't contain a magnet. Instead, it is realized on its owner to manually set the arm to due south before they begin their journeys. The complex mechanisms within the device would then ensure that the arm continues to point south no matter how many twists and turns the owner might make on their travels. This basic function, when used in conjunction with the primitive maps of the time, would give people fighting chances of not getting lost when crossing large distances. Maltese cart ruts. Who or what created the features known as the Malta cart ruts in the Maltese archipelago? These deep grooves, which cross the land at the site of Mizragar-il-Kabir, have been created in the solid bedrock and yet are almost certainly artificial in origin. In one particular location, they form such a recognizable artificial pattern that they have been compared to the meeting point between train lines at Clapham Junction in London, England. We know of no natural phenomena that would create marks like this, but we can't think of a good explanation of how ancient humans could do this either. They are known as cart ruts because they look like they were left behind by the carts as they were dragged through the region, but no cart could ever leave behind such wounds in solid rocks. If they are not cart ruts, they must have served some other purposes. It's been theorized that they could have been created for irrigation, or perhaps as ways to important ceremonial places, but neither theory can be proven. We have no doubt that humans made these marks many thousands of years ago, but we have no idea how or why there are still many things that we don't know about. Giant statues. There are still many things that we don't know about the famous giant head statues on Easter Island, but as of January 2019, archaeologists think they might know why they were placed where they are. If they are right, the location was chosen because it's close to fresh water. When the statues were built almost 900 years ago, fresh water would have been the island's most precious resource because it has no strings or natural springs. Instead, water came out close to the coast or from beneath the ground, a process called groundwater discharge. Moai statues almost always appear close to such places. Even if this is true, it leaves us with a lot of questions, like why go to so much trouble to make large, elaborate statues when a simple marker would do the job of telling people there's fresh water nearby? Are the statues supposed to confirm the presence of water, or do they denote the ownership of the water resource? Who do the statues represent? This is the constant problem with archaeology. Even when you think you have come up with an answer, it leads to more questions. Over the course of a long career, an archaeologist is bound to see one or two things that they struggle to explain. Normally that's no problem, as when they can't explain something, they turn to scientists for assistance. But sometimes, scientists are no help either. On those occasions, we're left with strange, unsolved mysteries. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and enjoy watching new videos. Thanks for watching, and see you soon.
A typical day in the life of an archaeologist.
Actually flew. We don't know.
Found in a vast burial site.
Bird is definitely the first step on the way to...
Here are the main wall, the other one over there. We don't quite know yet.
Controlling it in any way, you need the tail to keep it.
And right now we're at the point where we're pausing and we're going to start excavating the features, and then I think we're going to move to the western part of the site.
And ultimately, I can expose this thing. As I'm looking at it and clean it up, it's just a plain old rock. But there are a lot of these kinds of objects that we find in sites. Sometimes they're artifacts, sometimes they're just plain rocks.
Excavation units from the Phase 2 survey last summer.
Way down here into a layer that's close to 10,000 years old. Well, that's not a good thing for our ability to figure out what's happening here at the site.
One having the different kind of material culture.
And pottery wash. Now, pottery to an archaeologist is more valuable than silver and gold. And
On the straight and level.
very sophisticated knowledge in other areas.
This year's first excavation season started on February 24th and finishes now as the heat